The auctioneer dropped the gavel at $60, and the loudest man on the lot laughed at him in front of the whole crowd. Wendell Prue did not laugh back. He just lowered his hand, the bid already his, and looked up at what he had bought, a great dead machine at the fence line, a church pipe organ 2 stories tall, a fanned wall of wooden and metal pipes rising over a carved keydesk, and a foot-pumped bellows, the whole rank furred gray and rat-chewed and dead silent, the leather long since perished to powder. So far gone the crowd read it as nothing but a rotted wall of junk pipes. A thing the county had written off as scrap the day the little chapel came down, that 100 bidders had walked past as too big to move and too far gone to ever sound again, and that Wendell had just paid $60 to own. Dead bellows and dust and worm-eaten pine and all. It was a bright, clear Saturday morning, the kind of hard light that comes off a gravel lot at the end of summer, at a church-clearing estate auction held in the grassy yard beside a weathered white country chapel on the edge of a small farm town. Wendell was 73 years old, lean and a little stooped now, but sure in the hands, with a deeply lined face gone soft and papery. Wispy white hair, wire spectacles pushed up his nose, and pale, patient eyes that took their time. His hands were narrow and careful and marked at the fingertips with a lifetime of small nicks and glue and pipe metal gray, the hands of a man who had spent his life reaching down inside instruments to make dead things speak. Wendell had worked that trade his whole life, an organ tuner and reed organ man, the one the churches and the funeral parlors sent for when a thing had to sing true again, until the country chapels closed one by one, and the new churches bought electric boxes with a switch, and the old men who could voice a pipe by ear and re-leather a bellows by hand were quietly closed out. The man who laughed was Dale Ossie, who ran the biggest architectural-salvage-and-antiques yard in 3 counties. A heavy-set man of about 55 in a loud plum purple sport coat he wore to be seen in, his face clean-shaven and ruddy, a thick gold ring on one hand and a stub of a cigar in the other. $60, Dale said, loud, so the whole lot could hear it. $60 for a rotted-out dead pipe wall, tuner, bellows gone to dust, half the pipes chewed up by rats, leather perished, the whole thing silent since before you and I were young men. Nobody's pumped a note out of one of these since the chapels died, and nobody's going to. You can't play it, you can't move it without a flatbed and 4 strong backs, and it's too far gone to fix. You didn't buy an organ, old-timer, you bought a wall of scrap lead and worm-eaten pine, and you paid $60 for the privilege of hauling it home when the wrecker would have run it to the dump for nothing. He coined the name right there, loud enough to carry the old man's dead pipe wall, and it stuck for the rest of that month. The crowd laughed because Dale laughed the way a crowd does. Wendell stood through it without a change in his face, his hands folded quiet in front of his apron, and let the laughter pass, the way weather passes a man who has decided to stand in it. Now, if you have ever watched a quiet, capable man get talked over by a loud one, if you have ever known somebody whose skill the world used when it needed something made to sing and forgot the rest of the time, then you already understand what this channel is about, and you might take a second to subscribe, because the people who stay for stories like Wendell's are exactly who Iron Hook Stories was built for. Wendell said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that work does not answer to noise, what Dale Ossie could not have known, grinning behind his cigar, was that Wendell had stood in front of that dead organ with 50 years of the trade awake in him. The crowd saw a rotted wall of pipes. Wendell saw the organ, under the dust, the way the pipe mouths were cut and voiced, the careful joinery of the case, the great wooden windchest behind the rank where the wind is held and given to each pipe in its turn. And the work was wrong for what they were all saying. He knew what a plain factory organ looked like, stamped out and screwed together by the dozen, and what a real builder's looked like, voiced and fitted and finished by one careful hand. This was a builder's. Above all, he knew that a proud old organ builder almost always signed his name where the world would never think to look, cast on a plate inside the chest, penciled on the back of a pipe, sealed in the dark behind the bellows. The rest of them were pricing the thing by the pound of lead. Wendell knew the difference between scrap pipe and a great organ somebody had let die. And what he found when he opened it up that night would cut a forgotten builder's name, and the one masterwork of his life, back into the record that had let them both go. Wendell had come up hard. He went to the organ loft young, apprenticed to an old tuner, learning the pipe and the reed and the long patient feel of voicing until a rank spoke even and true, and made himself into the kind of hand a church or a parlor called by name when the music had to be right. His wife Nora had died after a long illness, and they had buried no family of their own, and after Nora was gone, he lived alone in a small house behind his old shop with his ranks of spare pipes and his quiet. The town had a use for his hands and no use at all for his memory. He knew that. He bid on the organ anyway. He bid because he knew it. A builder's organ left to rot under a fool's dust is a question, and a man who had voiced 10,000 pipes could no more walk past a great one going for scrap lead than walk past his own past. The crowd had seen a dead pipe wall. Wendell had seen the instrument as it was, cut and voiced and joined by somebody who knew exactly what he was building and had signed his name where a proud builder signs it. If you've made it this far into Wendell Prue's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. He let them sell the rest of the estate first, the pews and pulpit and boxed hymnals knocked down to the dealers, while Wendell waited at the fence line beside the tall dead organ. When the auctioneer finally came to the silent pipe organ and called for a bid, Dale glanced up at it, called out his joke, and not one other hand went up. Wendell raised one finger, and the gavel came down at 60. He paid cash, signed the slip, and arranged to bring a flatbed and a few strong backs around at the end of the day, because a 2-story pipe organ was an awkward, heavy thing to move whole, and the auction rules gave a man until dark to haul off what he had bought. The story got around the town before Wendell's flatbed was off the county road. By Monday, people who had not spoken 20 words to him in years stopped him outside the feed store to ask, grinning, whether he was going to hold a concert on his dead pipe wall to get his $60 back. Ed Marsh, who ran the hardware counter, said it plainer, that there was nothing to a dead chapel organ but rot and dust and a wrecking crew glad to see the back of it. Wendell was buying a roll of new bellows leather, a soft brush, and a box of clean rag, and did not look up. "We'll see," he said, and that was the whole of his answer. He had spent 50 years learning that an organ is either a builder's or it isn't, and the noise a crowd makes has nothing to do with which one. But Wendell did not open the organ up in the daylight. With the dealer's truck still on the lot and Dale holding court by the auction table, he waited until the place had emptied out and he had the great instrument home, eased down off the flatbed, and stood square against his shop wall under a single work lamp, and went at it alone that night after the town had gone quiet and the windows up the street had gone dark. He did not tear into it. He knew that an organ keeps its truth deep inside, behind the front rank, down in the great windchest, in the dark void behind the bellows, and that you reach those places slowly, the way you reach into anything a careful hand once closed up. He drew the dead front pipes one by one and stood them in order, brushed the dust off the mouths, and read the voicing as it came clean. And when the first bright pipe came up under his lamp, he stopped with the rag in his hand, because what came up was not a stamped-out factory pipe, but metal cut and nicked and voiced by somebody who cared how it sang as well as whether it sounded, and it stood there in his hand like something that had been waiting for exactly this. Down at the diner, they were still asking if he had held his concert yet. Wendell wiped his hands and moved the lamp in past the front rank, back toward the great wooden windchest, the way you go looking for the place a builder hides his name. The organ had its own long, hard history, and the town had let it go for scrap with never once asking after it. It ran all the way back to the man who had built it, a self-taught 19th century American organ builder. A man of no fame in his own time, who had learned the craft alone in a Rivertown shop and spent his working life turning out plain, honest instruments for churches too poor to send east for a famous one. And it ran back to the one great organ of his life, this one, the masterwork every builder carries in him and most never get to build, a full church organ for a little country chapel that could barely pay for the lead, voiced and joined and finished far beyond what the job was worth, because the man had wanted, once before he died, to build the finest thing he was capable of and set it where it would be heard. He built it, and it sang in that chapel for a generation. And then the country emptied out, and the chapel closed and was forgotten. And the great organ sat silent in the dark behind boarded windows until the leather rotted and the rats came, and no one alive remembered a masterwork had ever been raised in that little building. The builder himself died poor and unknown, his name on no famous instrument, his one great work sealed up in a dying chapel where no collector ever thought to look. What none of them ever asked was what becomes of a man who builds the finest thing he has in him and sets it in a place the world forgets. The answer had been standing at the fence line the whole time. Silent under the dust in a $60 organ nobody wanted. Wendell drew the last of the front rank and reached in past it to the great windchest, and what he found under the lamp told him whose organ it was before he had it half open. Screwed to the face of the chest, filmed over with 40 years of dust and mouse dirt, was a small cast plate, not stamped tin, not a paper label, but cast brass. The letters raised proud in the metal, the way a builder marks a thing he means to stand behind, a maker's plate, the builder's own name and his Rivertown cast into it. Wendell wiped it clean with his thumb and the rag, breathing shallow, and when the name stood clear in the lamplight, he set the rag down and stood very still. He knew the name. Any man who had come up in the organ trade knew that name, a builder spoken of quietly among organ men as one of the great lost hands, self-taught and never famous, whose few surviving instruments were half legend and whose one rumored masterwork had never been found. So scarce a whole working life could pass without a man ever laying hands on his work at all. And here it stood, cast in the builder's own brass, screwed to the chest of an organ that could only be the lost one. But the plate was only the start of it. Wendell went deeper now, easing out the largest bass pipe, a great wooden pipe as tall as he was, and there on the back of it, chalked and penciled by the builder's own hand a lifetime ago, and never meant for any eye but his own, was the name again, and a date, and a line the man had written to himself the day he finished it. And behind the bellows, in a shallow void built into the frame, where a careful man will hide the thing he most wants kept, sealed against the dust and waxcloth, Wendell found a small, leather-bound book, the builder's logbook, the record of the organ in his own hand. Every rank and stop and measure of it, and folded inside, the story of the one instrument he had given his whole life to. Wendell sat down on his shop stool with the book open under the lamp and read it slowly, and understood that the dead pipe wall the town had laughed at for a month was the lost masterwork of a great forgotten builder. The finest organ the man ever made, and the one everybody in the trade had given up, is gone, worth a small fortune to a museum of American instruments that knew that name, and worth far more than money as the recovered life's work of a man the world had let disappear. The next morning Wendell did not call a scrapyard, and did not strip the organ for its lead pipe and old pine, and did not gut the case into one of those reclaimed pipe organ liquor bars or a garden trellis for his own porch, and a few in town thought him a fool a second time. He let them. He had spent one whole month being the man who paid $60 for a dead pipe wall, and he did not mind being thought a fool by people who had never once been right about the thing in front of them. He carried the maker's plate and the logbook first to a museum of American instruments that knew what the name meant, and set himself to the harder thing to cut a forgotten builder's name, and the one masterwork of his life back into the record that had dropped them, and to find what descendants that builder had left, and put into their hands the fact that their people had built something great, not nothing at all. The museum's curator went very still over the maker's plate and the logbook, and said quietly that a whole, recoverable organ by that builder, the lost masterwork itself, its own logbook with it, was the kind of thing a museum of American instruments waits a lifetime for, and had all but given up as gone, and that the man who built it had been no failed country tuner at all, but exactly the kind of overlooked master the record is supposed to keep, and had simply lost. And the builder had descendants in the country still, a great-grandson 2 counties over among them, a gray man who had grown up on a scrap of family talk that some old great-grandfather had built church organs and died with nothing, a story the family told as a failure and mostly let go. Wendell went to him that fall with a photograph of the cleaned organ, the builder's cast plate plain on the chest, and the logbook open to the man's own hand, and watched a gray man read his own great-grandfather's name signed inside the masterwork of his life, beside the curator's word that the man had built one of the great lost American organs and been forgotten for it. He put a hand flat on the table and went quiet. They had grown up thinking their old builder a man who failed at a poor trade. The logbook told them instead that he had built the finest instrument he had in him and given it to people who could barely pay, and that the world had simply chosen to forget the organ instead of remember it. The man asked why he had troubled to come so far to give a poor dead ancestor back his good name. Wendell said only that a builder signs his name inside the chest where nobody will ever look, and hides his logbook behind the bellows, because he needs to believe that someday somebody will come who can find it, so that being forgotten can never be the same as never having built the thing at all, and that he had nobody of his own to leave a thing to. So he had brought the old builder's name and the old builder's masterwork home to the people they were always meant for. There was one thing more Wendell did before the organ left his shop, and he did it for the builder and for no one else. He restored the organ the slow, careful way over a season of nights, re-leathered the great bellows, rebuilt the perished parts of the windchest, cleaned and repaired the rat-chewed pipes, and stood the rank back in order and voiced it by ear the way it had been voiced the first time, not to make a show of it, but because an instrument a great builder had poured his life into deserved to do the one thing it was made to do. And he did not strip it for its lead, and did not gut the case into a bar or a lawn piece. Because using a lost masterwork organ for scrap pipe or a novelty was the most ordinary thing in the world, the very thing that had nearly killed it. And there was no truth in it. The truth was the instrument itself, the name cast inside its chest, and the voice the builder had given it. So on the last night, with the museum's people coming in the morning, Wendell sat down at the keydesk, worked the pedals to feel the mended bellows, and drew one stop and played a single long chord on the organ under the work lamp, the first sound that instrument had made in 40 years, low and even and true, filling the little shop to the rafters. He had not scrapped it or made a bar of it. That part was never the point. He had made it sing again so that the man who built it would be heard one time by somebody who finally understood what he was. That fall the organ went where it belonged, into a museum of American instruments with the builder's name read clear at last and his lost masterwork named beside it in the record. And the pride of it, and a share of what a recovered organ like it is worth, went to the builder's descendants the logbook helped Wendell find, generations late. So the family that had thought their old man a failure knew at last that he had built one of the great lost American organs. Word of it went around the town the same as the laughter had, only quieter, and the people who had called Wendell a fool let the name the old man's dead pipe wall drop and did not pick it up again. Dale Aussie was not run out of business and was not made a villain. He was simply a man who had laughed loud at a thing he never bothered to look inside, and the next time he held court by the auction table the others did not lean in so far. Wendell never said a word against him. Being right was the whole of what he had wanted, and it had brought a great, forgotten builder's name, and the one masterwork of his life back up out of 40 years of dust. The museum kept the organ where the town could see it. They set the tall pipe organ against the wall of the front hall under a soft light, the case cleaned and waxed and warm again, the bellows sound and the rank voiced true, the maker's cast plate read clear on the chest, and the builder's own logbook open in a case beside it. The lost masterwork of a great forgotten builder, restored to his own name at last, and once a week a player sat down at the key desk and let it sing. And a card told whoever came through that this organ had been the life's work of a self-taught American builder the world let disappear, torn out of a dying chapel and hauled toward the dump. And heard again only because somebody troubled to open the thing they laughed at. And on a still evening that next spring, the light going gold through the tall front windows, Wendell Prue drove over to look in on it, and there in the last of the sun stood the organ, whole and voiced, and heard at last, the wood glowing warm where a stranger's hands had finally reached it. Wendell was 73 years old, a man the auction had laughed at one whole month, and he stood quiet a long moment and laid one narrow, careful hand flat on the cool wood of the case beside the cast name, and nodded once, the way a man nods at a job that was done right. The work had said it for him, the way work always did. A builder signs his name inside the chest where nobody will ever look, and hides his logbook behind the bellows and trusts that somebody will come who can find what his hands made under whatever the years lay over it, so that being forgotten for a lifetime can never be the same as never having built the thing at all, and a town rarely knows what greatness was left to rot at its own fence line, until somebody troubles to open the thing they laughed at. So I'll leave it to you. Was Wendell Prue right to give the organ to a museum under the builder's name and put the worth of it into the family's hands without keeping it for himself? Or was that one decency too far in a world that had laughed at him for nothing? Tell me which one in the comments, and I'll read them.